morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. My name is Huang. I'm from the Department of Sociology and Criminology at the University at Buffalo. So today I'm going to present our project titled Early Life War Exposure and Later Life Chronic Pain in Vietnam, Risk, Resilience, and Timing. So I'm going to start with introducing our motivation of this project, talking about why study war and chronic pain is particularly important for low and middle income countries. Then I will discuss our research questions, data and methods, major findings, and finally the implications that can be drawn from this project. So first, war. We think study war is particularly important for low and middle income countries. Right now, about a quarter of the global population, around 2 billion people, and over a quarter of world children, around 400 million children, are living in war-affected areas. This is particularly important for the low and middle income countries since most of the war in the late 20th and early 21st centuries have happened there. However, most war-related studies focus on Western countries, especially for Western veterans. In this project, we argue that war is an underestimated health determinant because its impacts are multifaceted and enduring. So there are three key theories that can help us understand why the dynamic war impacts. The first is the stress proliferation theory. It suggests that one series primary stressor can generate multiple secondary stressors over people's life course, causing enduring health damage. So war brings not just the immediate dangers like bombing and violence. These stressors don't just, but also they create ongoing struggles like disrupted education, poverty, hunger, and social instability. These stressors don't just stop when the conflict ends. They trigger subsequent chains of risk that continue to affect people's lives, leading to their poor health outcomes even decades later. And the second theory is the critical period theory. It proposes that the influence of war depends on the timing of exposure. So childhood is considered the most critical period because the effect of childhood adversity are difficult to modify by later life experiences. And war exposes children to all kinds of risks that can disrupt their physical, psychological, social, and intellectual development. In contrast, adolescents are comparatively more physically and emotionally well equipped to handle war-related stressors. However, most war-related studies didn't take this different age cohort, this difference into account. And third, we argue that most war-related studies are risk-focused, but we argue that war can also promote people's resilience against the later life negative health outcomes. And we think study resilience is very crucial, like many scholars have argued. Understanding what helps people turn off the chains of risk is very important because it could lead to better long-term interventions. So next, I want to briefly talk about why we want to study chronic pain. There are so many reasons why pain is a major issue in the health field, and here are some reasons. First of all, chronic pain is the leading cause of disability and the number one reason people go to the doctor. It is estimated that chronic pain can cause greater personal and societal cost than any other prevalent chronic conditions like hypertension and heart disease. And the study chronic pain is particularly important for low and middle income countries because it is estimated that around 33% of adults and 56% of older adults in these countries are affected by this condition. What is also important is that pain is closely related to social and health consequences of war, such as lower SES, unhealthy behavior, physical damage, and multiple mental disorders. Despite this, research on how war affects chronic pain is extremely limited. So in this project, we focus on the case of Vietnam War. Vietnam shares many common characteristics with the other low and middle income countries, such as underdeveloped welfare and healthcare system. And in this context, wars and armed conflicts pose particularly threat to population health. Another key reason we want to focus the Vietnam War is that children and young adults who experience the peak of war are now reaching their old age. So this gives us a unique opportunity to explore the long-term effects of war. Based on what has been discussed, we propose 4 research questions. First, we ask, does the early life exposure to war increase the risk of pain in people's later life? And second, we ask, does the war only create risk, or can it also foster protective or resilient factors against the pain? In this project, we propose the 4 blocks of risk or protective factors. Block A is the socioeconomic status, B is health behavioral risk, C social engagement, and D health conditions. Following this question, we also want to explore to what extent that war can affect the pain through risk or resilience process. The risk process can be identified when risk factors such as lower SES mediate the link between war and pain. And the resilience process can be identified if protective factors such as a higher SES or less likelihood of smoking. If these protective factors can suppress the link between war and pain. And finally, we want to explore whether these 3 relationships differ by age cohort. So in this project, we use the data from 2018 Vietnam Health and Aging Study, which surveys older adults who are aged 59 years or above. We divided our sample into 3 age cohorts based on their timing of war exposure. Like child cohort include people who were aged 6 to 11 in 1965. Adolescent cohort are people aged 12 to 17 in 1965, and young adult cohort are people aged 18 to 23 during the war. Our independent variable is war exposure, which is measured by 2 domains, including malevolent living conditions and violence. And the dependent variable is moderate or severe chronic pain. So remember, we proposed the 4 blocks of mediators. So SES is measured by education and occupational prestige. Health behavioral risk is measured by smoking and heavy drinking. And social engagement is measured by social engagement score. And for health conditions, we consider people's physical disease count and their post-traumatic stress symptom score and distress score. We also control for people's sex, military service, and their geographic location in 1965. As for the statistic analysis, we use logistic regression to examine the relationship between war exposure and pain. And for the relationship between war exposure and potential mediators, we use different types of regression depending on the mediator's level of measurement. And the mediation analysis was conducted by using KHB method. So here are our major findings. First, we find that greater war exposure are associated with substantially increased risk of later life pain, especially for people who were exposed to violence. And the second, on the one hand, we find that war indeed generates multiple risks, such as lower education, worse physical and psychological health, and greater risk of smoking. On the other hand, we find that war can promote people's social engagement, which have been proved to be the protective factors against chronic pain. And through the results of the mediation analysis, we find the We find the poor health condition, especially distress, can mediate the relationship between war exposure and pain. And the last question is whether do war impacts differ by age cohort? The answer is mixed. So first, we find that the child cohort is the most vulnerable. That means their pain risks are more sensitive to the level of exposure, especially for people who were exposed to the violence. And however, we didn't find a significant relationship between war exposure and chronic pain among the young adult cohort. As for the relationship between war exposure and mediators, we find war exposure can increase risk of disease and a post-traumatic stress symptom score in every age cohort. Interestingly, we find violence exposure can increase the educational level among the child cohort. However, exposure to malevolent living conditions hampers the adolescent educational attainment. And we also find that the child cohort appears less negatively affected by wartime exposure than older cohort in terms of later life physical disease count and occupational prestige. But the child cohort, people who are who in the child cohort, they have a greater tendency to smoke. And the mediation analysis, the results of mediation analysis by cohort indicate that the impaired physical and mental health mediate the war pain association for both child and adolescent cohort. So the implication that can be drawn from this project is that based on our results, our findings, we think addressing psychological trauma due to violence and poor living condition is very critical for post-war recovery. And we think enhancing for the survivor who were school-aged, we think enhancing the quantity and the quality of educational programs during and after war is very important in order to mitigate the adverse impact of war on their SES trajectory. And we also think more interventions regarding healthy coping strategy are needed, especially for young children during the war, because we already see that the wartime children are more likely to use tobacco as a coping strategy to the war-related stressors. And finally, we suggest that post-war recovery program should also be customized based on survivors' age cohort. Thank you.